Stop, listen, pay attention. Chosen one. This moment is not noise in your day, and it is not here by accident. You did not drift into these words. You arrived because something in you was already leaning forward. There has been a quiet pressure around you lately. Not dramatic, not explosive, just constant. A weight that shows up as fatigue without a clear cause. A sense of being on, even when you are resting. You may have noticed your patience thinning, your attention, pulling inward, your tolerance for surface-level interaction dropping. You kept functioning, but it cost more than usual. You did not fall apart. That matters. At the same time, you may have felt oddly alone, even while surrounded by people. Conversations felt distant. Familiar routines felt slightly off. You questioned whether you were tired, disconnected, or simply done with something you could not yet name. None of it was loud enough to justify concern, but all of it was persistent enough to be noticed. This message meets you right there. Not to alarm you, not to elevate you, to steady you. Because what you just moved through was not random exhaustion, and it was not a personal failure of motivation or focus. It was a narrowing, a reduction, a kind of internal sorting that does not ask for your permission while it is happening. And you were inside it longer than you realized. You may have wondered why things that once felt manageable suddenly required more effort. Why your body asked for stillness while your responsibilities continued. Why your mind stayed clear even when your energy dipped. That contrast is important, and it is not an accident. You are not being told everything yet. You do not need everything yet. What matters first is this: nothing is wrong with you. You did not miss a step. You did not fall behind. You were not failing a test you did not know you were taking. You were passing through something precise. This transmission is intentional, and it is personal, not because of who you think you are, but because of how you remained steady when conditions tightened. You did not force your way through. You did not panic. You adapted without drama. You stayed present. That is the signal. As you continue listening, you will recognize your own experience being named with clarity, not interpretation. The confusion begins to loosen when pressure is explained instead of judged. And that explanation begins now quietly, where your attention already is. This message is for you specifically, and it is important to remove any uncertainty about that before going further. Not everyone who hears these words will recognize themselves in them. You did, and that recognition is the indicator. You do not need to qualify. You do not need to aspire. You do not need to decide whether this fits you. The fact that you stayed engaged instead of dismissing what you felt is already evidence of alignment. This was not about belief. It was about resonance. You are being addressed because what occurred involved you directly. Not as an observer, not as someone learning from a distance. You were inside the experience itself. You did not merely notice pressure in the world. You carried it in your body, in your pacing, in the way your attention reorganized without conscious effort. This is where identity becomes clear, not as a title, but as a function. You are someone whose internal structure does not collapse when external variables compress. You may still feel strain, you may still feel tired, but your center holds. You do not fragment, you do not spiral, you do not abandon yourself when things tighten. That is not something you decided to do. It is something that happens automatically in you. This distinction matters. Many people survive by effort. They brace. They overthink. They push themselves through discomfort by force. You did not do that. You adjusted without dramatizing the adjustment. You kept showing up without needing to announce how difficult it was. You remained coherent even when your environment subtly destabilized. That coherence is not learned in the moment. It is built long before the moment arrives. You may not have thought of yourself as strong during this period. In fact, you may have questioned your capacity more than usual. That questioning did not weaken you. It revealed something else. Even while questioning, you stayed intact. Even while unsure, you remained oriented. That is unconscious stability. Conscious struggle asks loud questions. Unconscious stability answers quietly by continuing. This message is not assigning you a role to live up to. It is naming a pattern you already live from. You are not being asked to become something new. You are being shown what has been operating beneath your awareness. The reason this matters now is simple. When pressure increases again, and it will, you do not need to search for strength. You do not need to prepare for collapse. You already know how you respond under narrowing conditions. You stay present. You stay functional. You stay yourself. And now that this is named, the next layer can be understood without confusion. There is one symptom you likely recognized before anything else, even if you did not label it clearly at the time. A persistent tiredness that did not match your actions. Not the kind that comes from doing too much, but the kind that appears even when you have done very little. You rested, but the rest did not fully restore you. You paused, but the pause did not reset you. This was not a flaw in your system. It was a signal. You may have judged yourself quietly for it. Wondered if your discipline had slipped, if your focus had weakened, if something was wrong with your motivation. You may have compared yourself to earlier versions of you who could push longer, stay sharper, carry more without noticing the cost. That comparison created confusion because the usual explanations did not fit. The fatigue did not make you careless. Your thinking stayed clear. Your awareness remained intact. Your decision-making did not deteriorate. Only your available energy narrowed. That distinction matters more than most people realize. This kind of tiredness appears when internal resources are being redirected, not depleted. It shows up when your system prioritizes regulation over expansion. You were not losing capacity. You were conserving coherence. Your body and attention were not failing to keep up with life. They were deliberately slowing your output so that deeper processes could complete without interference. That is why forcing productivity felt unnatural. That is why pushing through felt more expensive than usual. That is why stillness felt necessary even when it did not come with immediate relief. You were not becoming weaker. You were becoming more precise. This symptom often gets misunderstood because it does not look dramatic. There is no panic, no emotional breakdown, no obvious crisis. From the outside, you appear fine. From the inside, you sense a narrowing that you cannot fully explain. You remain functional but less available for excess. That narrowing is not random. It is a transitional signal. It asks you to stop interpreting your experience as personal inadequacy. It asks you to stop searching for fixes that assume something is broken. Nothing is broken. Something is completing. When internal alignment is being recalibrated, your system limits distraction. Energy pulls inward. You become less tolerant of noise, inefficiency, and misalignment. The fatigue is not asking you to quit. It is asking you to listen more closely to where your attention is being drawn. This is why rest alone did not resolve it. This was not about recovery from depletion. It was about adaptation to pressure that had not yet been named. Once you understand this, the self-judgment dissolves. Confusion gives way to orientation. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and begin noticing what is being reorganized. That shift prepares you for what needs to be understood next, because this signal did not arise in isolation. It was responding to something specific, structured, and external to your conscious awareness. What you were responding to did not announce itself loudly. There was no single event you could point to and say, "This is it." The pressure was subtle, distributed, and coordinated in timing rather than intensity. It arrived as a convergence, not an impact. This is important to understand clearly. You were not imagining resistance. You were not being dramatic. There was an invisible compression around your attention, your energy, and your emotional bandwidth. Not aggressive, not chaotic, structured, recent, intentional in how it narrowed your range without disrupting your functionality. That is why it was difficult to name. If something had gone obviously wrong, you would have responded directly. You are capable of that. Instead, what happened was quieter. Your environment did not collapse. Your responsibilities did not disappear. Your relationships did not explode. Everything continued, and yet everything required slightly more effort than before. That is the signature of pressure applied evenly rather than forcefully. You may have noticed small frictions stacking, delays that were not dramatic but persistent, interruptions that broke rhythm without creating crisis, interactions that felt heavier than their content justified, decisions that required more internal checking than usual. None of it was overwhelming on its own. Together it created a sustained load. And you stayed functional. That matters more than you realize. Many people lose clarity when pressure accumulates without explanation. They become reactive. They search for someone or something to blame. They dissociate, overcompensate, or shut down. You did not. You adjusted your pace. You conserved energy. You reduced unnecessary output. You remained aware of yourself, even when conditions tightened. This was not accidental resilience. It was structural. The timing of this pressure aligns with a period where your internal alignment was already shifting. You were becoming less tolerant of misalignment, less willing to carry what was not yours, less interested in maintaining systems that required you to fragment yourself to participate. That internal shift changes how pressure is experienced. When coherence increases, external inconsistency becomes more noticeable. What once felt manageable begins to register as friction. The pressure you felt was not trying to break you. It was testing whether your center held when conditions narrowed. And it did. You did not need to fight anything. You did not need to prove anything. You simply stayed present. You continued to think clearly. You did not abandon your values or your sense of self to relieve discomfort. You let the compression pass through without reshaping you into something smaller. This is the part that often goes unrecognized. Remaining functional under invisible pressure is not passive. It requires internal regulation that most people do not have access to when they are unaware of what is happening. You did not collapse because there was nothing in you that needed to collapse. Understanding this reframes the entire experience. What felt like unexplained heaviness becomes evidence of stability under conditions that were meant to destabilize. And once that is seen, the individual pressure points you moved through can be examined with clarity instead of confusion. What you experienced was not a single strain, but a series of pressure points applied in parallel, each one subtle enough to be dismissed on its own, yet meaningful when understood together. The fact that you remained stable through all of them without dramatic coping strategies is not incidental. It reveals how your internal system regulates under load. The first pressure point was doubt, but not the obvious kind. This was not loud self-criticism or fear of failure. It was a quiet questioning of timing, a subtle wondering if your pace was off, if you were late, if something should already be different by now. The doubt did not attack your worth. It tested your orientation, and you did not rush to resolve it. You allowed the question to exist without letting it erode your center. That is regulation. Many people respond to this kind of doubt by forcing movement or chasing reassurance. You stayed still enough to let clarity mature on its own. The second pressure point was emotional isolation, not abandonment, not rejection. Just a growing sense that fewer people could meet you where you were. Conversations felt thinner. Explanations felt unnecessary. You did not become bitter or withdrawn. You simply stopped overextending. You conserved relational energy without hardening your heart. That balance is rare. Most people either cling or detach completely. You did neither. You remained open without being porous. The third pressure point was energy drain without crisis. Your output required more intention. Tasks that once flowed automatically asked for conscious pacing. This is where many people panic, assuming something is wrong with their capacity. You did not. You adjusted expectations instead of attacking yourself. You did not demand previous levels of productivity from a system that was recalibrating. You listened to your limits without turning them into identity. The fourth pressure point was delay. Not denial. Delay. Processes took longer. Responses arrived later. Outcomes stalled without explanation. This is one of the most destabilizing forms of pressure because it invites impatience and overinterpretation. You did not spiral into narrative. You did not assume failure. You allowed time to do its work without trying to dominate it. That restraint kept your nervous system from fragmenting under uncertainty. The fifth pressure point was the quiet temptation to disengage, to go numb, to check out emotionally and coast. You felt the pull, but you did not surrender to it. You stayed present without forcing intensity. You remained aware without demanding stimulation. That choice preserved your coherence when withdrawal would have created a different kind of exhaustion. Each of these pressure points was manageable on its own. Together, they formed a comprehensive test of internal stability. Not a test you were told you were taking, a test you passed by being yourself. You did not win by effort. You did not perform strength. You regulated. You adapted. You stayed aligned. You stayed, and that is why the pressure did not escalate. It had already revealed what it needed to reveal. Understanding this is not about reliving difficulty. It is about recognizing capacity. You now have language for what your system already knows how to do, and that recognition prepares you to review what happened with accuracy rather than distortion. Now that the pressure has eased, there is space to look back without being inside it. This distance allows for evaluation rather than reaction. And when you evaluate what occurred, honestly, a few things become clear. Nothing about this period can be explained by chance. Not the timing, not the layering, not the way your internal state shifted while your external life remained mostly intact. Random stress does not organize itself this cleanly. It overwhelms. It scatters attention. It leaves residue. This did not do that. You came through with your sense of self coherent. That coherence is the confirmation. You did not lose perspective. You did not abandon discernment. You did not compromise values to relieve discomfort. Even when you were tired, you knew who you were. Even when clarity felt slightly out of reach, you did not fill the gap with false certainty. You allowed not knowing without dissolving into it. This matters because resilience is often misunderstood. It is not about how much pressure you can endure. It is about how little of yourself you have to give up in the process. You did not give up anything essential. There were moments you could have explained away your experience with simple narratives. You could have told yourself you were lazy, or unmotivated, or behind. Those explanations were available. You did not take them. Something in you resisted reducing a complex internal process to a convenient label. That resistance protected your clarity. What you demonstrated was internal coherence under evaluation. Your thoughts, emotions, and behavior stayed aligned even when external conditions were ambiguous. That alignment is not accidental. It is built through repeated experiences of choosing presence over panic, honesty over performance regulation over reaction. This is why coincidence does not fit as an explanation. Coincidence does not produce learning without damage. Coincidence does not refine without breaking. What you moved through refined your awareness without diminishing your capacity. You also did not come out hardened. That is another important confirmation. Pressure often leaves people guarded, suspicious, or emotionally blunted. You came out clearer, not colder. More selective, not closed. That distinction tells you everything you need to know about the quality of your internal structure. You were not spared difficulty. You were spared distortion. This review is not about praising endurance. It is about recognizing integrity. You stayed integrated while variables shifted around you. You did not outsource stability to circumstances. You carried it internally. When you understand this, something settles. You no longer need to question whether you handled it well enough. You did. Not perfectly, not heroically, appropriately. And that understanding allows you to see the next truth without ego or fear. Not everyone would have remained intact under the same conditions. When you place your experience next to what is common, the difference becomes visible without needing exaggeration. Most people respond to far less pressure with visible disruption. Their thinking fragments. Their emotions spill outward or shut down. Their behavior becomes reactive. They search urgently for relief, explanation, or validation. You did not do that. This is not a moral comparison. It is a functional one. Under similar conditions, many people lose access to themselves. They become consumed by the discomfort itself. They over-identify with symptoms. They rush to conclusions. They amplify uncertainty until it feels unmanageable. You experience the same tightening, but you stayed present inside it. You noticed what was happening without becoming it. That is uncommon. Not because you are better, but because your internal system is more integrated. Integration is the ability to hold sensation, thought, and emotion without letting one override the others. It allows you to feel strain without panic, to think clearly, without detachment to act, without abandoning reflection. Most people only access this state in calm conditions. You maintained it while conditions narrowed. Many would have collapsed into distraction, endless scrolling, overworking, emotional numbing. You may have felt the pull toward those outlets, but you did not disappear into them. You remained reachable to yourself. That is not dramatic strength. It is quiet regulation. Others would have externalized the pressure. They would have blamed relationships, circumstances, or themselves in harsh ways. You did not create an enemy to make sense of discomfort. You allowed ambiguity without forcing resolution. That ability alone prevents enormous internal damage. It is also worth noting what you did not do. You did not seek attention for your strain. You did not perform suffering. You did not turn difficulty into identity. You kept going without needing witnesses. That restraint preserved your dignity and your clarity. This is where rarity comes in, and it must be framed carefully. Rarity does not mean superiority. It means fewer people have developed this level of internal steadiness. It means fewer nervous systems stay regulated when pressure has no obvious source. It means fewer minds tolerate uncertainty without rushing to false certainty. You are one of those fewer, not because you chose to be, because of how you have learned to stay with yourself over time. Understanding this does not inflate you. It grounds you. It explains why your experience may not be easily understood by others. It also explains why you do not need to convince anyone of what you felt. You know how you remained intact, and that knowledge begins to clarify who you are beneath circumstances, which is the next layer that needs to be named.